quite a bit.
All right, good morning, y'all. How y'all feeling today? Our little team went pretty deep last night, so might be a sluggish start. Try to laugh at jokes if we make them. And it always helps if one or two of you would like to argue with what we're saying. That would kind of lighten up the room a little bit. We will take no offense to that. I am Hugh Halter, and this is Taylor McCall. And we're going to kind of share a little bit of our story and kind of frame what we are calling Brave Cities. We just released kind of our document book just a few months ago. Started doing podcasts that were released, I don't know, probably, 3-4 months ago, started doing that. So we're just kind of coming out of the dust a little bit, but we've been sort of at this for quite a while. A little backstory for us, just so you have some context. We've been kind of moving in what, many of us now would call the missional stream of things. And so some of you might know our story, Tangible Kingdom, from the early days. It was really about, it was like an early microchurch type of a book. We had planted in Portland, Oregon, then Denver, Colorado, mostly in kind of a non-Sunday centric focus. So it's, for me personally, I love to see what has happened in sort of the conversation nationally last 20 years. I think there's been a lot of progression. I love the heart and the work behind this conference. Most of the people that have instigated this are very, very close friends of both Taylor and myself, so we're delighted to be here. But we have found that our story seems to be a little bit weird. Early, 20 years ago, missional community microchurch was weird, and people were trying to figure out the framing for that. What's that look like? What we're going to present, we're finding right now, people are going, we like it, but we have a lot of questions. It might not look like there's a formula to it. So we're going to just try to unpack that a little bit, and hopefully, I think we've got a little bit over an hour. But you can find us, bravecity.com. You can get a hold of us at our personal emails. So after this, we'd love to help you guys process this. So Taylor McCall, are you checking your emails? You got something good?
Yeah.
Start us off with a little talking about formula.
Well, we were just kind of talking through how do we want to engage this conversation with all of you, and in our book we start off with this idea of that we call music, not math. And the reason that paradigm is important for this whole conversation is because we want to discover together, why are we even here? Why are we doing this? Why are we moving in this direction? And for us, it's because we want to find the artists, and then we want to inspire and beckon everyone back to the artistry of the kingdom life. If you've been in this conversation, in this missional space for any amount of time, if you've been in the traditional church for any amount of time, you kind of have seen that everything seems to be overcome by formulas. And we even come into these spaces a lot of times looking for formulas. And I understand why that pursuit engulfs a lot of us. But we want to move away from that. We feel like when nuances, when principles, when passions and prophetic drive turn into formulas, turn into math, that God really sees that he's not needed anymore. And he kind of hands it over to us. And I don't know that there's judgment there. I don't know that there's guilt or shame to be embraced, but I do know that what we want is we want to call the church every year, regardless of where you are. We want to call the church back to the artistry. In our book, the subtitle is The Archaeology, Artistry, and Architecture of Building Kingdom Ecosystems. And we see that as a process, but not necessarily a linear process, something that kind of bobs and weaves and threads through our time of being in cities, being in neighborhoods, being in a missional context, and the archaeology becomes that waiting period, that investigation, that listening, that sniffing around for what the Spirit of God has been doing for centuries and what the Spirit of God is wanting to do next. We say a lot that we don't build the kingdom, we uncover the kingdom. And that nuance is important because the kingdom has always been here, and you're not going to go somewhere and take it for the first time. But the kingdom has been covered up in the vines and the rubble of Babylon. It's like the artist who was asked about the sculpture, and they said, how did you make this? And his response was, oh, all I did was chip away that which was not this angel, this beautiful sculpture. And we kind of see ourselves as that, as artists and songwriters and sculptors and painters, as we're going into cities and we want to rediscover the kingdom that's always been there. And we want to begin to chip away that which is not her. Babylon that has taken over, empire that has taken over. And to kind of pass it back is the why for us is to say, to reimagine a lot of the things that Jesus taught us. We want to talk about Luke 10 when he sent us out to go into cities and to find a person of peace and to heal the sick and cleanse the leper. We want to reimagine what he meant in Revelation 18 when he said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Come out of her, lest you take part in her sins." We want to reimagine what it looks like to actually see the city rejoice when the righteous prosper. So you'll hear us talk about all these things, but at the very onset of it is the why for us, that we would move away from the math of mission a little bit. We would move away from the math of ministry, and we would kind of get back to that wild Jesus that I think we all at some point in our lives encountered and wanted to follow into anything. And wanted to pursue into anything and say, we're here, open hands, our hearts are fully yours, show us what to do. And sometimes that requires years of listening, years of archaeology, years of uncovering what has been covered up so that we can then walk at the cadence that he's walking.
Does that help at all? We just want to frame almost the spirit of the conversation. And by the way, my whole life, I never felt like I was very creative at all, so I would go to places like this, begging God to give me the keys to the kingdom. But if you remember Matthew 16, where Jesus actually says, "I will build my church," right? So some great things all of us need to be reminded of today. Like Jesus said, "I'll build my church," so you never have to worry about trying to build that thing. You can release that pressure. He also referenced that none of us have the power to convince or convict people of sin, righteousness, or holiness. You don't ever have to carry the weight of trying to convert somebody or get them to believe something. So, just take those stresses off your plate. But you also, as Taylor said, we can't build the kingdom, so you don't have to even worry about building the kingdom. So what's left is to find some friends that are committed to the person of Jesus and to let him show us what he wants to create in the cities that we're called to or in the neighborhoods that we're called to. So in the microchurch conversation, I want you to picture our story as one microchurch, okay? That's the way we would frame it. We have lots of little groups and gatherings and things and businesses and whatnot. But the way that we would perceive is we're one small little family. Picture 20 adults is about what this story is based on. But something began to happen in this town with a small group of people. So when you think microchurch, sometimes we think gathering to discuss, okay? I want you to now think about microchurch as a group of friends that get to work together and sniff around together. Archaeology, kind of like you're digging very sensitively and, you're trying to blow away, just keep moving slowly together. And then as you uncover, you start talking together. Oh, hey, what do you think? Maybe we should do this. And so you begin to move into works, that they may see your good works, right, and glorify our Father in heaven, right?
Yeah, so
go.
as we started this experiment, what we thought was kind of a fresh expression 15 years ago, we slowly over the years started to find out that no, we were just in the line of many that had come before us, of what we call kingdom ecosystems, what the Old Testament called cities of refuge, what the New Testament called the way, what the Trappist monks called an order, what Josiah Henson in Dawn, Ontario called the Dawn Settlement, what today friends like Desi Baker and Neil Cole call an Ark City in Globe, Arizona, and so many others that have come before us that saw the story of God as this ecosystem that began in a garden and that ends in a holy city, and that we were just set apart as his people to continue building that kingdom ecosystem wherever we are, to continue architecting that kingdom ecosystem wherever we are. And we found similarities in every one of them.
Yep.
We've seen that these men and women and families will go in across the board and will just listen. And they'll just be there. They don't know why God wanted them there, but they know a couple of things. They know that there's hurt and pain and brokenness and sickness that they have good news for. They know that there's loneliness and fatherlessness and darkness, that they've somehow been given a light that can brighten it up. But they don't go in as colonizers. They don't go in as dominionists. They just go in as archaeologists. So we learned this from them. We started writing what we were seeing. And then as they would listen and they would perceive, and like we said, as they would uncover and chip away the vines and the rubble, they would see what God is doing, and they'd just start sweeping. And they'd talk to a neighbor. And then as they talked to a neighbor, they'd find out that there's a food shortage. And so they'd start dreaming. Almost like if you've ever written a song or painted a portrait, if you really care about it, you go into your closet or into your booth or into your bathroom, that's where I go, and you just wait. And you hear the melody, you kind of wrestle with the idea, and then you just start to play. And the song comes out. And that's what they would do. The artistry would come out of these men and these women and these families. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, a grocery store is up and running. This guy's hustling and working with food distributors and bringing in, racks and racks of cereal and noodles and milk. And then all of a sudden they realize, like in Alton, that there's no place for people to gather during the day. And they start thinking and dreaming and wondering, like, what could bring peace here? And we decide on coffee and a brunch menu. And so people start coming together and they start gathering, and peace starts coming over the city, and favor starts coming to the architects. So as you begin the artistry phase of dreaming and thinking and listening, then you start to architect things, because you assess the needs. You see that there's loads of fatherlessness in your little corridor where you're living, and you find out that all of these young people are really into basketball. And you're like, I like basketball. So you say to some moms, you say, hey, is there any program for your kids to get involved in to kind of develop their skills, maybe be mentored, maybe have kind of father figures in their life? Yeah, there's some, around the region, but they're far too expensive, and I work 3 jobs. I can't take my kids. So you start a basketball program because you're listening to the song and the melody, And that began, all of a sudden, after a few years, you look around and an economy has developed. There's businesses, and there's little intentional homes where people have moved in to bring hope and light to their corner. There's little justice works like overnight warming centers and free markets and bike shops for people who don't have transportation. And you didn't even know anything about bikes. You couldn't even put a chain on. But you started a bike shop because you met a bunch of men living on the street that couldn't get to job interviews. And you were like, well, I can't get them cars because they're banned from driving for life because of 7 DUIs, so I'm going to start a bike shop. Does anybody know how to make bikes? And you start playing that song. And you didn't seek out to build an economy. You just sought out to listen to the song that God is singing, see the kingdom that was there once that's been covered up. And as you begin to uncover it, an economy unfolds. And this story has been the same generation after generation. It's not changing. What I think, just to give like a small prophetic word, I think what we did is we tried to create an industrial revolution of church planning. We wanted to mass produce it. We got tired of waiting on God. He's too slow. We need it now, so we need to go in with our egg drops, no offense.
And our funding does run out in 3 years, so we got to get going.
And with our fundraising and with our, we get as many people as we can on our launch Sundays. We never saw this throughout history. We started this because we thought it was effective and we thought it would make the impact that we wanted. But after years of doing it, I think most of us have realized it didn't have the result we thought. It's kind of like when we inserted GMOs into food. We thought it would be better. But 100 years later, it didn't work. It's made us all sick. And I think in the same way, the way we mass produce church planting, it made us all sick. And we're just trying to say, hey, hold up. You don't even like it. You're stressed. You're pissed. You're judgmental. Your marriages are hurting. You don't have any money. You don't have to do it. You can actually relax, wait, and just live somewhere for 40 years. Sweep your sidewalk, plant a garden, and start a pub. That's our message.
With this extra time that you now have, there are some lovely breakfast joints around. You're fiery today, bro. Fiery. So Brave Cities the idea is that we build a kingdom city within the cities that we live. Okay, so that's why we frame that out. We see the church as a city that you build within your city. We actually don't put a lot of hope that we can change any of our cities. So you should know that. And I know as evangelicals, we thought our job was to go clean up the homeless problem in Portland, Oregon. And so we try that stuff. We throw billions of dollars, and then if you've ever been to our little town that I grew up in, it's not doing better with all that we've thrown at it. Babylon has a problem. It actually doesn't want the things that are wrong to get fixed. So we don't try to fix Alton. We don't try to fix Birmingham. We don't try to fix. But we think that if we build a kingdom city within the city that we're living in, that there will be a different way that people witness the story of Jesus, and that they will want to trade citizenship from Babylon into the kingdom city.
And the simple way that we say it is there will never be a hungry person at my table.
So in our city, we don't have hunger. In our city, we don't have fatherlessness. So any of these kids that are coming in, they immediately have 25 dads, and we tell them that. Okay? We can't fix it for everybody, but in our city, the city on a hill, they start to see that that's a whole different world. It's a different type of a human that's in there. That if you can get inside of there, as we saw in the book of Acts, that nobody had any need in there. And we could tell each other, look, you don't have to be anxious about anything. And we can say that now, not just because it's a nice thing to just say and hope that they believe it. We go, you actually don't have to be anxious, because if you have a need, we will actually take care of that for you. We'll help you with that. Does that make sense? So all the things we hear in Scripture where Jesus will just go, chill, relax, it's okay. They see it because they go, no, I've been in there. If you get in there, that's why we got our name Christian, this place where people saw that there were very distinct people that don't believe the same things, and they had this economy. Like they lived under the reign and rule of Rome at the time, but they gathered all their stuff together, shared it all, and so you could get stuff you couldn't get anywhere else inside that economy. Does that make sense? Yeah. So a brave city is a kingdom city you build within the city that you live in. And the activity is in a progression, archaeology, artistry, and then you add architecture as you build. You see the kingdom being built out. You do add a little bit of structure to hold that thing together, but it's really to keep propelling the movement forward. It's never to centralize any of the stuff or the movement. You own nothing. You share everything together. And this was our story. So let's go into a little bit of a story. Thank you, ma'am, for that one bit of applause. What's your name? We'll try it. No. Well, we like you, so.
Thank you, Pastor.
Yeah, so here's a little bit of a story. Taylor's story is 10 years prior to our story. And I'm going to tell a little bit of your story, but Taylor and his family left existing church ministry and just moved into areas of Birmingham that had more need. And they just started to sniff around. They did not have what we ended up having in Alton. So they started with no actual economy, just a few bucks. And it starts with coffee and it builds out. And eventually there's about 20 businesses throughout Birmingham. When we showed up in Alton and began to sniff around and then go, okay, I think we should start with this, I needed help because I had not done any of those activities before. So we knew we were going to do coffee. So I heard from Brian Sanders, there's this guy in Birmingham that knows some stuff about coffee. So that's how Taylor and I met. Their team came up and coached us into that. But Taylor's actually been a mentor to me. I was the classic kind of microchurch guy. I was driven by the idea and the heart of evangelism, that people would come to know Jesus. So it was always about just relational evangelism. I had not put my hand to the plow in regards to building out economy before. And so start to find this community. And interesting hearing Taylor's story. His family eventually came up and joined us in Alton for what was just going to be a year, kind of a breather. And Mayor of Birmingham met Taylor, or they saw each other at a car wash in Birmingham. And Taylor just mentioned that he was going to be moving up to St. Louis area. And the mayor said, is the whole movement... And their movement had a name. So not a church name, but it had a name of a movement. He says, is your whole movement going to leave? And Taylor said, no, just our family. And the mayor said, good, because if your entire movement were to leave Birmingham, we would have to immediately figure out a way to raise taxes to cover what you guys are doing for our city. But that was not thousands of people. That was about 100 intentional missionaries that had moved into these neighborhoods. So again, we want to give you an idea of numbers and dismantle some of the ideas of you need lots of people to do stuff. You will find that if you can just find a few friends that go into an impoverished part of a city or an impoverished city and you do small, little, tiny things, micro things, eventually the town will actually go, you changed our town. And that began to happen. So I just want you to see 100 intentional missionaries there. We were, my wife and I, my 2 adult daughters, their brand new husbands, moving to a city we knew very little about. My son Ryan had severe epilepsy. We put him in an assisted living center. We were living in Denver, Colorado at the time, finishing up kind of 14-year church plant story. And we put Ryan out in this assisted living center. We'd go to visit him. And we'd fly into St. Louis Airport, drive through Ferguson, and then across the Missouri River, Mississippi River. There's a little river town called Alton, Illinois, about 25 minutes out of downtown St. Louis. And as we would go to see him, our son, he had lots of issues related to the epilepsy. So he was excited to see us, but he only wanted us to hang around for 10 minutes. And then he wanted to play Game Boy with his buddies. So we'd come in for 3 days. We'd have 2.5 days to just goof around.
He had some ladies there too.
Yeah,
right?
he had some girlfriends. He was a big deal where he was at in St. Louis. So we would like sniff around town. We'd pull house flyers. We'd see these beautiful houses that were, you put them in Kansas City, they're $1 million, and they'd be $80,000. We'd just like, we'd joke about moving. We should move here. Like, this would be really cheap. And then we'd try to find coffee. Couldn't find a coffee shop for a town of 30,000 people. And so I started to get angry, you know. And I remember one day I stood out on the main Broadway strip, and I just stood out there. I was trying to see if nothing was moving. Cars were not moving. There were no people moving. And then we just started to kind of, each trip, sniff out a little bit more. And on one particular occasion, my wife, coming out of this Italian bar, she said, hey, why don't we move here and see if we can do something to help the town? So that was how she framed it. And I didn't want to leave Denver, so we got in a bit of a skirmish over it for a couple weeks. And but we eventually went, okay? And it was really kind of on her whim, and my 2 adult daughters and their husbands wanted to go. They're like, let's go do something together. But we had no idea what we were going to do. There was no sense that we're going to plant another church, but I mean, we figured stuff would happen. And so we showed up. We bought my oldest daughter. She said, put me on a really rough street corner. And so we found that. They're all over the place. Found a crack house for $12,000, so we bought that and renovated that, put her and her husband, her family in that. Bought my other daughter a house about 4 blocks away, and then Cheryl and I were right in the middle of that. So we're all right downtown. And it was really just more to like be present, like just get there. And we didn't do much. I would walk the streets in the morning and kind of pray, meet people. And the things I was specifically asking, I was 50 years of age, 2 church plants, working hard, just doing ministry, hoping God blesses it. That was the first 50 years. This one, I was tired, I was upset, I had to leave Denver, and I would say stuff to the Lord, like I'd say, hey, teach me how to only do what I see you doing. Like I want to learn, and I would say, I don't want to waste any more time. I'm tired, I don't need to really do anything. There's no ambition left. My illusions are gone. I would just say, but we will do anything you want us to do. And I would say specifically, would you bring it to me? Let me know and I said, put bread on the trail. I said, we won't look for too much bread or the whole loaf, but would you just keep putting bread on the trail? And so about 6 months in, a gentleman that I had met one time called me and he said, hey, are you busy? I said, I don't do anything, John. And I said, come on over. He said, yeah, I want to show you some buildings I own around our town. So we got in his little Subaru, and he's showing me all these buildings he had bought. And he pulled up in front of the federal post office that was right across from City Hall, center of downtown, overlooking the Mississippi River, very beautiful spot. But it had been boarded up for 60 years. Just like the one hotel in town right next door, 60-year close, right next to the Grand Theater, this beautiful old historic theater, all boarded up 60 years. And he goes, I just bought this about 1.5 years ago. And he goes, what do you think about that? And I was like, looks like a very beautiful, like it would have been the crown jewel of the downtown. He goes, yeah, that's why I bought it. And he goes, so you like it? I was like, yeah, obviously it would need a lot of work. And he goes, well, I'm glad you like it. I think I'm supposed to give it to you. And he said this, he goes, I think you'll figure out what to do to help our town. So now I'm starting to go, maybe we're not going to get back to Denver, And so I told him no originally because I was afraid I couldn't fix it. It was too big, and we didn't have any money. And so I said, John, why don't you just keep your building, invest your money into your building, but hire me as your general contractor, and maybe we could get it breathing. And he said, that's a great idea, but I think I'm supposed to give it to you. So he took the key off the key ring, handed it to me, said, if you really don't want it, give it back to me. But he said, take a little time and decide. So we got the family in there. We walked around. And in 5 minutes, we knew what we were going to do. We were going to create the living room for our town. And so obviously coffee, obviously daytime space. In most cities, when the city begins to move, it's because people are having meetings between about 7 a.m. and about 1 p.m. It's called the creative hours. Around 3, they start thinking about happy hour. And by 5:30, they're flat jiggered, getting ready to just like do it again, okay? But the morning time, so Alton had all these biker bars. Nighttime life was fine. You could get hammered if you want to in Alton, easy. But it had no place where people could get together and actually talk and dream and think, plan, map out their future. So we had about 12,000 square feet. So we started took about 10 months. We renovated the whole thing. Had one couple that said, when you figure out what God wants you to do, call us. We'd like to help financially. So when I had the key, I called Carol and Al and told them what was going on, and they said, we're in. And they made a very large over-the-phone, like, we're in for this much. That's when I realized we weren't going back to Denver. And I said, thank you, I'll let you know if we decide what we're going to do. And so with that little sense of like, wow, maybe we could get started, a day later I was speaking at a men's retreat in San Francisco, telling the story of what our family was thinking about doing, and 6 men that I didn't know at all wrote checks for about $150,000. And I said, I haven't even taken the building yet. They said, well, just rip them up if you don't need them. So I flew home with that. So between the two, there was about $500,000 in 6 weeks. So God was beginning to teach me. Like, God's the most creative person in your city. You don't have to worry about that. And he actually has everything that he needs to do what he would like to do. He just basically needs a few people that got just a little moxie, a little crazy stupidity, maybe a few friends that are going, yeah, I think this could work. Just need a little bit of confidence to just have some faith and try some things. And so with that, we opened up Post Commons. Everybody knew it as the Post. We just said it's going to be a common place. We don't know what's going to be in there someday or if there's going to be lots of different things, but the core businesses became the Post Commons Cafe, Brunch Cafe, Idol Roasting Company, and events. People would come in and they would go, can we do our wedding here? So we became the premier event space in town. And then what we noticed is that people just stayed there because there was no other place to be during the day. Everybody was doing their actual jobs in our building, so they couldn't afford office space or whatever. So you'd see people doing therapy sessions. You'd see some, cats over in the corner doing a Bible study, whatever. But you'd see city meetings, so people from the city would come over and do their meetings there. You saw reconciliation meetings. You saw people starting to bring their portrait studio business through and taking photos. And eventually people started to see us as like an incubator. So when we got the building, we said, well, we got to set up a nonprofit as like a holding company for LLCs. So we set up Lantern Network. And we told the government the only thing that this nonprofit's going to do, we didn't nonprofit it as a church, we set it up as a charitable organization with the purpose statement to incubate good works. That's all we said. So a good work could be anything. It doesn't have to be a Christian that's doing a good thing. It could be somebody that's just trying to better their life, like this young baker that came through. Our coffee was fantastic, but our pastry sucked for about a year. We eventually find this young baker that's trying to just get her life going. She had been clean off meth about 5 years, met her at a little city market, and I told her, ours sucked, I heard yours are good. I said, what's your goal? She said, I just want to have my own brick and mortar someday. And I said, well, what do you need to have to get there? And she said, I just need a commercial kitchen. And I said, we have one of those. And we close ours at 2 o'clock every day, so why don't you just use ours? And long story short, when she finally got her brick and mortar deal, I didn't even know she was on the radio, but we have a local radio station. And I'm just driving around and I hear this woman and they're going, Tanya, tell us how you went from your drug addiction to having your own bakery shop. And she said, oh, it was Hugh Taylor and the people up at the Post. And she said, they gave me everything I needed. They took very little profit from us so that we would have most of our own profit. They helped us with our social media, and they became our family. And then she asked me to be the one that cut the ribbon when they opened, the brick and mortar. But so that to us is a good work. And by the way, the day that they came in for the first meeting, her husband sat there with his arms crossed, and he looked like he already didn't like me. Like some of you look sometimes when you come in. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "I Googled you." I said, "Well, what'd you find?" He goes, "You're like a Christian." And I just kind of went, I said, "Has that been a problem for you in the past?" And he said, "Every time." And I said, "Can you try to just put that aside? Our pastries suck. We need them to be better. Yours taste really good. Can you try to forget the Christian problem you've encountered your whole life?" And so when we finally, see, our team, anybody that started something good, we all gather Tuesday mornings. That's our one time that we get together. And we pray and we talk about Jesus and we try to hear from God together. And on this particular day, we were praying, and the guy in charge of our coffee, he looked up and he said, "Can we talk about Tanya?" And so we come up from that because we're trying to hear from God, who's the creative one. And David says, "I feel like we need to love her better." And I'm the guy running the money. I'm like, "Look, we can't, like, we ain't making it. Like, what are you talking about?" And he said, "I think we can do better on helping her with her marketing. And do we have to really charge her 20% on her pastries?" I said, "Well, sales tax is 9%, so there's not much wiggle room." But our team met, and then we started talking about faith and love. And we were like, "Okay, so you guys we all decided we all want to take a risk." So we called them back in and we said, "Hey, can we just take 10%? And so when they declared that they were atheists on day one, they started to say things like, "You guys are making it really hard not to believe." So this is the story of like a kingdom movement in a city. So we started to build things out, and all of a sudden there were new businesses that were being incubated, both from our team and then from people on the outside. Then a co-working space had to be added. And we just tried to give anything we could give to help anybody do anything good. And we found out in about 2 years that we had the peace of the city. So in the back of the Brave City book, you'll see a thing called Gray Pages, which are the learnings that we pick up along the way. And Taylor just framed out, he said, let's do the first Gray Pages on that passage in Luke, where Jesus says, "Go into the city," right? Like, it's just, this is how you enter a city. And don't take the 3-year funding. Go in with nothing, okay? And then, what's it say? It talks about you got to find peace. We always said peace was like some guy named Pete. You're looking for Pete. We don't see it as that. It could be, but we think it's really about the peace. You got to, somehow peace is where you got to start. You got to do things to get the peace of the house or the people or the city. And eventually, where the righteous prosper, the whole city what? Rejoices. So that becomes a plumb line. So is this helping at all? Just to give a little story. Like, our story is actually, we're only 6 years in. Okay? And we don't think it's that big a deal. It's been a lot of work, not a lot of profit. We had probably $1 million come through our core businesses last year, but there's very, very little profit. Taylor and I take nothing from it, so it's not for us personally, but we steward it. We're the big brothers and the dads of the movement. We have the big sisters and the moms of the movement. And we serve it. We try not to be a burden on it as much as we can because we want to see the ecosystem begin to build out. What are you thinking? I know you're inspired by what I'm saying.
A lot of things. Well, I know that we do want to free up some time for some Q&A, but a couple bullet points to hit that maybe will provoke some questions. One, I want you to think of this city within a city as an act of a life of protest, what we would call holy subversion. We kind of take our cues a little bit. If you want to reimagine the Sermon on the Mount or rethink it with us for a second. When Jesus was talking, and he was talking about being struck or being required to carry a bag or being asked to tote someone's, tunic or something like that. We don't interpret it or see it as it's kind of historically being taught of just being kind and doing what people ask of you. And we've heard the platitude, go the extra mile. But we actually see it as a very strategic microcosm of holy subversion. When a Roman soldier would walk up and he would hit you with the back of his hand, he would strike you on the right side of your face. I guess if you're standing here, on the right side of your face, right? So the idea there, and I'm going to apply this, but just stay with me for a second. The idea there is to subvert that attack, not with offering, you're like, hit me over here too, but with saying, no, if you're going to hit me like a man. You show your position as an image bearer to this authority figure, this Babylonian authority figure that hits you like you would a dog, or you would a servant, or you would a slave. In the same way, they were required by law to carry their bag a mile, if you didn't know that. But it was actually an act of subversion to say, I'm going to carry it another mile. This could get the soldier in trouble for doing this act. So you can process that later, but what I want you to think about is what we're doing is we are waging war. At the expense of sounding cliche, we are waging war with love on the spirit and the power of Babylon that's taken over our cities. Because it wasn't meant to be this way. But when the curse came, the vines grew and kingdom was lost, like Narnia. And so we get to subvert that by building better businesses, not in a spirit of dominion, but in a spirit of servanthood, because we serve the city. And we allow the city to partner with us, but we don't go to the city for partnership. And that's a discussion for another time. But we're not looking to be in the pocket of the city, but we will serve the city if they want partnership with us.
By the way, when you study early, like some people will come into the post and they'll go, okay, what are you guys really doing? And just to goof with them, I'll say we're kind of like a neo-Trappist order. If you've ever heard about the Trappists, early Benedictines, remember St. Benedict, their motto was ora et labora, which meant to pray is to do the work. And the works that we do are literally how we intercede for our city are the works that we do. So if you wanted to join a Trappist, monastic community, they wouldn't just have you sit down and do a Bible study. They would go meet me in the field, right? So the discipleship, you always disciple towards what you're trying to produce, right? So in a classic, small group missional community, and even in some microchurch movements, we still just circle around the table. So we're going to disciple people that can sit around tables and talk, okay? That's fine. But if you want to disciple people that would actually change a city, then you actually have to do the discipleship in the work of changing a city. Does that make sense? So the Benedictines, they would do the works, ora et labora. And so things begin to move. And so they were the only order, historically, that did not have to beg for money. They were the enterprisal order. Tie this to the consumer church today, where Jesus says you cannot serve both God and what? The money of the Romans. The way that they use money to coerce and control, that's not the way that so you have to have your own economy. You have to have your ability to stand against the way that people do money and power and control, right? But the consumer church that many of us have been involved in and lead, you know that there is a tie to money, right? In fact, I've heard it so many times, people go, man, I just would love to do what you guys are doing, but, and we know what the but is. This would cost us. And then it's issues of my livelihood. I don't know how I would replace this income anymore. And so the artistry gets immediately a trash can on top of it. You can't create because you're in fear. And so the Trappists, by Rodney Stark, who studied monastic movements, said he believes that the funding or the movement of the Reformation was built upon the monastic communities, that by the time the Reformation happened, They owned a third of all the land in England. They were landowners, so they had some bit of power. Of course, there's corruption in the whole system, but you can see the issue of beginning to earn your own keep, and nobody's paid for ministry. So in the Brave City ideology, we don't think you ever need to get paid to do any of the works of ministry. We think you could do them all for nothing. Okay? Now sit with that for a minute. Like, do you really need to get paid to preach a sermon to somebody? Do you really need to get paid to lead a friend to faith? Do you need money to actually walk them into deeper faith? Do you need money? Like, no, of course. If our country gets taken out by some oil issue, we can't drive anywhere. Like, would God still be able to build his church? Of course. We would do the works, right? We would do them for free. So if you don't need money for ministry, then guess what we can do with all of our collected resources? We can now begin to put it into building things that over time cause people in the city to look up and go, we're just really glad you guys showed up into our town. Our son eventually passed away about 3 years ago, made it to the age of 33. I'm sitting out on the front porch of our house where he had died with hospice care, and an older woman walked by, and I knew her. We'd waved. She was way at the end of the street. And she turned around, and she was pretty misty, and she said, hey, the whole neighborhood knows what just happened. And she said, Ryan used to come down. We would talk for hours. And she goes, he's a delightful boy, very sorry that he just passed. And I said, thank you, ma'am. And then she started to walk away. And then she turned around, and then she made a comment a little bit like that mayor in Birmingham. She said, just so you know, she goes, we haven't talked, but the whole neighborhood talks about your family. And she goes, I just want you to know that we're all really glad that you guys moved to our town. And when you think about like the basic macro street cred of the Christian movement right now, I don't know in my lifetime if I've ever seen it worse. That's why I always say, like, true evangelism is not telling somebody something they've never heard. It's actually now, like, real evangelism is changing their assumptions about what they think the thing is all about. So when you now you hear the historical stories of what the church did, small little micro groups of friends that turned entire regions upside down, you start to get the picture that what we're talking about is nothing weird or new. It's been existing. It was the story of the Christians. It was our story. And so there's a way to now begin to challenge and go, we've got to get back into the work of economy building. So.
Right, so when we say holy subversion, we're subverting the ways of the powers. We're subverting the ways of Babylon, the oppression of the poor, the outcasting of the leper, the pushing out or the exclusion of many, greed, money first, building businesses on the priority of bottom line, business above relationship. All of these principles and nuances fuel what we would talk about when we say holy subversion. Second bullet point, we reimagine Luke 10. We see this call, what Hugh said, the street cred. We all have kind of heard the stories for years now of new church plants coming in, or new kind of innovative missional movements coming in to save the town and to do all of the great things and make everything better. And it doesn't really feel like peace is being brought a lot of times. It almost feels like competition is being brought. It almost feels like comparativeness and new strategies, and we're going to recruit people from your thing to our thing. And this doesn't feel like peace to me. And so we look at Luke 10 where he says, go and find a man of peace. And we challenge leaders to just spend 5 years creating peace in your region through things like coffee, food, presence, faithful presence, whatever it may be. We reimagine the next step that Jesus said, now heal the sick and cleanse the leper. What does that look like? Who are the sick and the leper in our context, and what does healing look like? A lot of times, this is when we move into real creative innovation of starting works and businesses that can bring healing, job opportunities, financial training, warming centers, overnight warming centers for men and women that are
By the
sleeping
way,
out in the cold.
I just want to keep giving you practical as he's giving you this. Taylor's got 5 kids. The boys are starting to play basketball. He could drive a half hour to the really nice suburb where they have really nice basketball stuff. But the friends of his kids live in our neighborhood that don't have dads and don't have access to any of that, okay? So Taylor literally finds a coach and starts a thing called Beyond Basketball. And it's almost all fatherless kids that are the friends of his children. And it seemed like every day Taylor was sharing the stories of these kids, and it's not like he was having a good time. These kids are all in really rough shape. And it's now connected to his own family. So as a mom and dad, what do you want for your kids, right? You want it all to go great. You don't want anything bad, but it's all integrated. So when Taylor's sharing the story, recognize like a lot of the things that God will reveal to you to do, there's some suffering to it. Like it's not just fun. Like coffee sounds cool until you got to grind cement floors for 6 weeks, and cinder block out windows and most of the works that we've done, I'd say we didn't intuitively just like go, oh, this will be great. It's all been really, really hard. And that's why I think, to me, it might be the real rub on why you would look at a Brave City ideology and go, I just don't think I'll do it.
Yeah, really, really hard and really, really fun. Just a total adventure. And then the third bullet point, and we'll kind of open it up, whatever else you want to say, but we reimagine the idea of the social set theory, if you're familiar with sociology at all, of how societies are broken into 3 sets. And there's great missional breakdowns of this concept, but we more applied it to the actual kingdom ecosystem, where you have the centered set, or the bounded set, the centered set, and the fuzzy set. So you can just make a note of this and go back and look at it. But when we look at our economy, we call them stewards, workers, and seekers, how it's all one ecosystem and everybody exists in it and no one is excluded. Now, we do draw lines, obviously. We can talk about that. Abuse is not allowed in our ecosystem. Spirits of the enemy that just bring vile, contextual attitudes, obviously we don't permit that. But there's no in and out here. The stewards are the ones that are guarding and guiding the culture of the movement. The workers we call them the table builders. And all of these tables exist within our city that we've talked about. You've heard about all of them. Intentional homes and restaurants and coffee shops and basketball programs and athletic training facilities and barbershops. And all of these tables are there intentionally for seekers to come and sit at and encounter good news, to encounter family, to encounter healing, to encounter what Jesus calls, or what Jesus says in the third phase of Luke 10, which is casting out demons. So we think of that as generational bondage being broken. See, a lot of times we go in as leaders and we want to jump to step 3. We immediately would just want to start healing and breaking bondage and bringing people to Christ so that we can grow our thing. But sometimes that takes years of work of sifting through all the rubble and the vines. So when you see the kingdom ecosystem, when you see this new or this kind of new idea for some of you of church, you see an entire economy where everyone has a place at the table. Yes, there are elders, there are moms and dads, grandmoms and granddads who will kind of guide and hold and steward the culture. Yes, there are intentional workers who are there sometimes for a time, sometimes for their whole life. They could even become stewards of this, who are building tables. But my favorite part is that seekers are always welcome. Sometimes we become the seekers. Sometimes a steward goes through a total life crisis and becomes a seeker because they don't even know where they are anymore. So they just need to sit at a table for a while and find hope and find good news. They don't have the energy or the mentality to guide or build anymore. And so this is what makes up any society, any economy, but we want it to be where kingdom is infused in that. So reimagining those things, I think, can guide us in what we talk about next.
So maybe just think, basically if you go, okay, if I was like to really think about churches building an ecosystem, what are the key things? We generally see that it's a connection between benevolent business, justice works, and intentional homes, okay? So classic microchurch, missional community, that still exists in our environment, but it's probably one of three major things that we're trying to see build out. So we don't build the kingdom, but we build things that God builds his kingdom or builds his church on.
And we would call all of that the church. So when people
always come in, they'll go, but do you guys still go to church somewhere? It was like hard to just like keep eye contact.
And usually what they're asking, y'all have experienced this before, but usually what they're asking is, do you have a worship experience? And we would say, sure, that's one of our tables. But that's not where everyone connects to Jesus. That's not everyone's speed. And so we have a lot of different tables where people, but we've been conditioned, obviously, I'm included, to think of church as a building and a worship experience. And we're just saying that's a great table within the ecosystem. And yes, we have that in Alton, but we have lots of different tables. So we try to, if we see a sincerity in the question, we try to explain that. But sometimes we just say, yeah, we go to church on Central Avenue, which is my house.
Sometimes it's funny if you go, okay, let me describe again what I've described. I'm with a people, I see them almost every day of the week. And we dream and we pray together. We share all of our stuff in common. We sacrifice for each other. We're in all of each other's kids' lives. We worship together. We talk about Scripture all the time together. We try to build things so that people on the outside of our movement can find their way in. If that doesn't fit your definition of church, then I don't know what else we could possibly do. And when sometimes people will look at us and go like, are you sure that your thing will work? And I have to remind ourselves that even when you're like trying to present an idea that might seem weird, what we've been doing collectively for the last 60 years has been proven. And I always go like, what's more arrogant, is try to start something new and artistic, or keep doing what you've been doing the whole time and think that what you're doing is better than what the new stuff. Like the onus should not be on the entrepreneurs to prove what they're doing. The onus now should be on those that are doing the same old thing and taking the money and keeping 85% of it to keep the lights on. So I just think we got to be careful. I think that there's an opportunity. So we've got a mic somewhere.
We might not need it. Y'all are pretty loud.
You could yell a question if you want to try to get a mic out to you. Yeah, it's usually a benevolent business, or a connection of benevolent business, justice work. So beyond basketball league for middle school kids would be a justice work. A warming center with the homeless would be a justice work, thanks. And obviously intentional homes. So homes are still, but in our setting, an intentional home is like an actually intentional. So we have lots of families. We wouldn't call all of their homes.
Right, that's actually an important distinction. There are people in certain seasons of life where at this moment, their home doesn't need to be set up that way. They need a sacred, quiet, kind of set-apart space for whatever reason, whether it's a child with special needs, a marriage that is struggling, a personality trait. An intentional home is a very important part of the ecosystem, though. It is a family unit that says we want to go and live here on purpose to bring light into the darkness. And I'm not saying that you can't do that anywhere, but I am saying that that should not be an arbitrary thought.
So the McCall family, they're in a house that was also donated to our network. And it's in a pretty rough patch of our town, and a tree fell down in a windstorm and crushed a very beautiful garage that you had. And we were all kind of bummed. Oh, shoot, our garage is dead. And so then the McCalls just started to build a really nice basketball court and put about $40,000 into the backyard. It's basically party zone for their whole neighborhood, and it's mostly kids. That to us would be like they're making financial decisions to turn their house into what the neighborhood needs. So that's what
6 months before our garage was destroyed, a freshman in our high school was murdered at the park just down the street from my house where a lot of kids play basketball. And after that, the mothers in my neighborhood were not letting their kids go to that park anymore, which was heartbreaking because it was a great place for kids to go. And so then our garage was destroyed, and it left this huge, space for us to create. And
there was, though, in one picture I took, I sent it to Taylor because you guys were out when the massive trees, about a 60-footer, and there's they had one of those really crappy basketball
everything
rims.
Was destroyed.
There's one little basketball rim sticking up through the middle of the rubble. It's like, God will always do that. Like, he will go, hey, this is what... There was a man that lived on the streets in Birmingham that was now a part of the McCall family, who a half hour early was sitting in a golf cart in the garage. And you guys have been trying to get rid of him forever, but he made it out. But the basketball hoop made it. Anyway. So questions, thoughts? Yep.
Hey, this has been really excellent. But let me ask you, Luke 10, it talks about Jesus sends them out 2 by 2. So how did you see, your partnership? Just if you could just talk a little bit, do you see, it's clear that there's a synergy and an energy and a passion and exponentially fruitful relationship. Could you just talk about your partnership?
Taylor will say something better. I would just say, we're trying to find principles of 2 by 2. I just think the biggest glaring thing is just you can't, I don't think I would have stayed on course by myself.
Don't do it alone.
Yeah, just don't do it alone. And in our community, if there's ever been a secret sauce that we see in communities, it's the connection between suffering and levity. That's basically the church in action. Because if you don't have suffering in your family immediately, the one unique thing about a Christian is we're supposed to wake up in the morning and go find it. That's the only thing that makes us different. We go into suffering. But you can't stay in suffering by yourself. You can't. You can't even bear it. And so when you have a friend that goes, hey, my daughter almost died last year. I was going through a rough day. Taylor called me, made a joke, got me through the day. That type of thing. So that's my thought on 2 by 2.
We like to think that one of the ways to interpret Jesus' moment at Mount Hermon when he said, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not withstand it, which is a better interpretation than shall not prevail against us. Because prevail against us makes us think that we're what? On the defensive. But the proper interpretation of that is that the gates of hell cannot withstand us. And that's true. But we like to think that mountain was actually, we don't like to think this is true, that mountain was actually called the gates of hell. We think that Jesus is calling us to the gates of hell. I'll build my church here at the gates of hell. So we're going to the gates of hell. We're not moving away from them to protect ourselves. And so in that, I can't do that alone. To be clear, I can't do that alone. I have to have
the most common thing we say to each other is, I'm done. That's like a daily. It's whoever's done that day. And then the other one will make a joke. Same thing with my wife and I. Okay? That's what we do for each other. I'll go, I'm done. And she'll be up that day. She'll go, no, you're not. So.
Yeah, so a question related to in the archaeology phase, if you will, which you said it never ends, right? It always continues. But in your initial forays, Did you go in with the possibility that there could be intentional homes there already, that there could be, the Mother Taylors, the sage couples that have been praying for transformation, or did you go in with
No, we
an
have to
implied
assume
bias
that.
that it's not there and we're going to come in community and do
Both.
it?
Because in Alton, there are people that we're finding that have been there a long time. We also find that most are not on mission, right? So it's always there. We view, even theologically, we think there's only one church. God has one church. So when we show up, we're not going to fix it all for everybody. We're on the backs of lots of people, but we also recognize that Babylon is pretty big and Babylon's pretty powerful.
We're just grabbing the baton
Yeah.
from what's been paved before us. I love to talk about revival because I think people get credit for revival that shouldn't have credit for it. It was the grandmothers praying 100 years before you started your worship service. You just got the fruit of it. And so we feel like we're coming on the tail ends of the grandmothers that have been tilling the soil for us little artists who are trying to do something creative, and they made it fresh, and we come in and say, very humbly, we'll take it from here. Yep.
By the way,
again, just to say, we are looking for the gates of hell. That's what we're looking for. So intentional homes is imperative.
Yeah, don't think archaeology is like just first step though, and then you stop archaeology. Like the first 5 years was about getting the peace, right? And so we built out what we built out as the Post Commons. Right now, we're considering selling the entire thing because needs have come up with the youth in our town, and we don't have the resources to go do what we think we want to do for the kids in our city. But we have the asset value of our businesses now. So we're re-archaeologing. We're sniffing around, God, is this what you want us to do? We hold everything as if it's all been given by God. Nothing's sacred in our deal. So if we give up the coffee shop to do a youth academy, it doesn't matter as long as God's been leading kind of each step of the way.
That's actually a really good thought maybe you could take with you. The work is sacred. Nothing else is. That table can go and a new one can start. See, we've made things golden calves that were never meant to be.
Even longevity, the idea that, your thing in Denver only lasted 15 years. Why is being there just like my mother died of dementia? Why is just being there a long time fading out something like we're shooting for? Like, why aren't we shooting for? No, let's if we can get there faster, dump that thing to get to that. I mean, why not? If there is only one church and God's always a creative force in our cities, then to me the pressure's off. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. You just have to be obedient and faithful and see what God's building while you're doing this. Hey Connor, thanks for being our Vanna White today. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So love the vision of creating new systems or ecosystems for the kingdom to be uncovered. How would you counsel us to equip people that are in existing systems, say as a teacher or as a banker, an accountant, on and on and on, that are going to the gates of hell that are already there? How can we equip people that are already in existing systems that are not seeing the kingdom?
Yeah. You want to handle that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's all about artistry wherever you are. So we would kind of say that there are foundational creators, but all of us are creators. I think it's so neat that I think it's Mark or Matthew or something, when Jesus rose and the ladies, they were like, go tell everyone. They said, tell everyone that Jesus is alive. And then they said, and especially tell Peter. And maybe that's because he screwed up the night before and they wanted to rub it in his face. But I think it's because he was seen as a foundational creator. We needed him to lay something new and fresh and that we could then come into and create out of. That's the apostolic. We talk about that in the book. There's way better books about that out there. But What we're saying is we're all creators, and in any space that you're in, you have to see the bread on the trail, and what do you want us to do here, God? What song do you want us to sing? Sometimes it's quit your job, and it's go start something new. Sometimes it's just be a faithful presence there, and wait and listen and uncover in the same way that you would in a city. Does that make sense? So it's not rocket science. It's probably exactly what you're thinking, but it's not everyone leave the bank or the hospital or the school. A lot of our leaders are school teachers, are nurses, we have a couple doctors, entrepreneurs. So yeah, we want you to be creators, kingdom artists in the spaces that you're in. But there is a call for the apostolic to come and be a foundational creator so that we can then build within that ecosystem.
Little challenge, though, in that question also is always like, okay, what do we do with the existing church in relationship to this new thing? I think I tried for 15 years to try to help existing church do, and Jesus kind of cuts through it. So maybe hear this if you need to hear it, but you cannot put new wine into old wineskins. So what you can do is add to the menu. So remember, Jesus loved both wineskins. He wasn't trying to blow up or belittle the old wineskins. He loves them both, but he just goes, when you start artistically creating new things, they just won't know what's going on. It's just going to cause you more fights and energy. So do the new artistic work almost like Navy SEALs. It's by cover of night, and just do it. Don't try to fit it in or get everybody to go do the new thing. And I think you might still have a job in 5 years. So if you try to get everybody to do the new thing, you're looking for trouble. So, hey, we got 7 seconds. Have a great life. No, if you need help, I think there are a few Brave City books still back there. You can get them wherever. We also want to have you go to Gray Pages, where we're doing pretty long-form podcasts on all the nuances we're finding, not just in our story, but guys, this is happening everywhere, okay? And we're starting to find these artists and archaeologists and let them tell their stories. So look for Gray Pages for the podcasts, and find us if you need any help. All right?
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.